You know, they say history is written by the victors. And for more than 200 years, we've been told the story of the American Revolution is a pretty simple one: liberty versus tyranny. But what if I told you that's not really the whole story? What if the revolution wasn't just born from these grand high ideals, but also in the anxious living rooms of social climbers and the debt-ridden account books of a global empire? So was it really that black and white? Brave patriots taking on some evil king? Or was it something a whole lot messier, something more human? What if the real story is about a bunch of colonial elites who were desperate for respect, crashing head-on into a bankrupt empire that was desperate for cash? Because that collision, well, it would change the world forever. The story we usually get is kind of the winner's myth, It's been polished up over the centuries. In this explainer, we're going to peel back those layers. We're going to uncover a story that's not just about liberty, but about social anxiety, and about profit. A story of a conflict that wasn't carefully planned out by philosophers in powdered wigs, but was accidentally kicked off by a young, ambitious guy in a forest halfway around the world. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with that myth. Then we'll meet Virginia's super anxious Shamatte elite. We'll see how a young George Washington actually started a world war. Yeah, really. Then we'll figure out why the victorious British Empire was flat broke. And finally, we'll see how these two worlds were put on an unavoidable collision course. And our story, it actually begins in the most British place you could find in the New World, Virginia. Okay, let's dive right into Virginia's whole vibe. This place was the absolute heart of the Revolution. I mean, it gave us 4 of the first 5 American presidents. And yet, this was a society that was totally built on this deep, painful insecurity. And that brings up this really fascinating question. How did the colony that led the charge against Britain end up being the one most obsessed with being British? Seriously, their leaders were rich, they were Anglican, and they basically modeled their entire lives on the English aristocracy. Well, the answer, weirdly enough, is in the dirt. See, Virginia's whole economy ran on tobacco, and tobacco is what you'd call a greedy crop. It just sucks all the life out of the soil in just a few years. So what does that create? A constant, desperate hunger for new land out west. It also meant that incredible wealth got concentrated in the hands of less than 100 families who ran the whole show. This created a culture just completely obsessed with showing off their status. But underneath all the fancy clothes and the giant plantations, these guys had this deep, dark secret. They were new money. You see, real British nobility, that was based on centuries of bloodlines and inherited titles. The Virginia gentry, a lot of them were just a generation or 2 away from being regular folks. They hadn't inherited their status. They'd earned it by growing a plant. And the real aristocrats back in London, oh, they could smell it a mile away. They even had a word for these colonial tryhards, Shamatte. And this was a devastating insult. It basically meant you were tacky, unrefined, a cheap knockoff trying way too hard to imitate the real deal. And this wasn't just some casual snub. It was a bone-deep contempt that guys like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington felt personally. This quote just sums it up perfectly. They tried so hard to be British that they ended up becoming a caricature of it. As one historian put it, if the fashion in London was 8-inch flares, Virginians would make theirs 20 inches wide. They were overcompensating, and everybody knew it. And that sting, the sting of being looked down on, of being called Shamatte, that was a powerful, simmering resentment just waiting for a spark. All right, so now let's bring in the man who's about to light the fuse on this whole powder keg. Let's talk about a young George Washington. Now, at this point in our story, he's not the father of a nation. Nope. He is the textbook example of this ambitious, status-hungry Virginian elite we've been talking about. Washington wasn't some great scholar. His job was a land surveyor, a practical, get-your-hands-dirty kind of guy. His real ticket to the top was marrying a wealthy widow, Martha Dandridge Custis. That move instantly launched him into the highest level of Virginia society. But the one thing he wanted more than anything else was respect. Specifically, respect from the professional British military. He wanted to be a real British officer, not just some colonial militiaman. So in 1754, trying to prove himself, Lieutenant Colonel Washington leads this small force into the Ohio Valley. Things get confusing, chaotic, and his men end up killing 10 Frenchmen. Now, Washington had no idea at the time, but with that one messy skirmish, he had just started a global landslide. That tiny incident in the middle of nowhere lit the fuse for the 7 Years' War, what a lot of people consider the first real world war. And after years of brutal fighting on multiple continents, Britain wins. And it's not just a win, it's a staggering victory. They become the undisputed masters of North America. So Britain had just won the world. They'd crushed their enemies, expanded their empire beyond their wildest dreams. But, as any gambler will tell you, the most dangerous moment is the one right after you hit the jackpot, because that's when you're most likely to lose it all. And that is exactly what was about to happen. You see, winning that war came at a catastrophic price. Britain was now diplomatically isolated because they had betrayed some allies to get their own peace deal. But even worse, way worse, the empire was completely, utterly broke. The scale of this problem was just mind-boggling. By 1763, think about this, a staggering 43% of Britain's entire national budget wasn't going to the army or the navy or running the government. Nope. It was going to pay just the interest on the massive debt they had racked up to win the war. Almost half their budget was just servicing debt. This created this huge imperial dilemma. So first, they had to somehow defend these massive new territories, which, by the way, included 70,000 French settlers in Canada who were not happy about the situation. To do that, they decided they needed to station 10,000 permanent troops in North America for the first time ever, and that little line item came with an annual bill of £300,000. So the big question in London was pretty simple. Who's going to pay for all this? Now, if you're sitting in London, the answer seems completely obvious. The American colonists were the biggest winners of the war, by far. Their main enemies, the French, were gone. Their western frontier was suddenly secure. They basically doubled their land overnight. So to the British government, it seemed only fair, only logical, that the colonists should chip in to help pay for their own defense. Makes sense, right? And this is where it all comes to a head. This is where the social anxiety of the Virginian elite smashes right into the financial desperation of the British Empire. You've got two groups of people speaking the same language, subjects of the same king, who are about to completely and fatally misunderstand each other. It's like they were living in two different realities. London looked across the Atlantic and saw these ungrateful Shamatte kids who got all the benefits of the war but now refused to pay their fair share to keep themselves safe. But America looked back and saw these arrogant parents just changing all the rules out of nowhere. For over 100 years, the colonies had mostly governed themselves, taxed themselves. What London saw as just a simple money problem, the colonists saw as a direct threat to their entire way of life and their rights as Englishmen. And just like that, the stage was set. What seemed like a pretty straightforward plan to put a small tax on stuff like tea and paper was about to explode into this huge existential fight over the very soul of the English Constitution and the very definition of freedom itself. So I've got to ask you, after hearing all this, what do you think was really driving things? Was this fundamentally a fight about money? Or was it something deeper, a more personal fight for respect from an elite that was just sick and tired of being treated like second-class citizens? I'm genuinely curious to see what you guys think, so let me know down in the comments. And hey, we are just getting started here. If you're finding this different way of looking at history as fascinating as I do, please make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because you're not going to want to miss part 2. Coming up next time, we're going to dig into why the Boston Tea Party was really more of a riot organized by smugglers trying to protect their bottom line, and how this whole money dispute spiraled into a constitutional deadlock that set the stage for a war that, honestly, neither side really thought would ever happen. Thanks for watching.